being a soldier, I thought I've served Navy and done precious little while I was serving. So I went to the battlefield as an embedded journalist. And there I was brought down forcibly because of some actions I was taking which I was not supposed to take. And while sitting in the mess, I called my officers as traitors. I asked them, how can enemy be sitting on your roof and you did not know about it? How were they fortifying bunkers for months together and we did not know? So one officer stood up and said, not everybody is a traitor, sir. My mother wasn't. And that's how my journey with this lady began, because I thought I was a brave man, that I left my family behind, 2 children, parents, wife, and went to battlefield as a journalist, where while I was president of a biggest pharmaceutical company in India. So I didn't really have to go there. But when I learned that here was a lady who, so petite, so beautiful, and she went to Pakistan to spy, and how? She had to kill her father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, their most favorite servant and husband in order to bring the data out, or in order to help India save thousands of lives. And when she was brought back, she was into deep depression because this was not her job. It took me 8 years to write this book. But in the end of the day, when she was brought out of depression, she was no longer an ordinary lady. She was a saint. I have some amazing pictures of her, which I'm forbidden right now to, in a matter of time. But she was not an ordinary lady thereafter. She could do anything with her blessings and good wishes and what have you. So this is what I have brought out in the book, that when she was to be awarded the highest award in India, she said, if the Lord grants you karma, there cannot be a bigger reward.
Harinder, in the telling of the story in the film Razi, one of the most interesting things is this. So this lady, she's Muslim, Kashmiri, and in the Indian present situation, if you're a Muslim, you're a traitor. If you're a Kashmiri, of course, you're anti-national. But here this woman she falls in love with this guy. She has to break off with him because she's agreed or accepted her father's request to cross over to Pakistan and marry into this family. In the telling of the story as the film, Harinder, tell us some of the challenges, because obviously in today's narrative, it would have been very easy to draw this line and make a particular group of people all black or all evil, and make a particular kind of person all good, etc. And yet, Razi, I think the fundamental reason why the film was so wonderful is that it didn't necessarily depict A or B side as being evil. It just told a story for what it was worth. But tell us how you were able to control it. Did you have the creative rights? Did you hold on to the rights?
So my writing book is not my profession. I don't need to earn money. I'm by God's grace doing pretty well for myself, heading a multinational company. But this was a passion. So I had put restrictions on the producers. I selected the director. Only so and so person will be the director. Only so and so person will play the leading role. The script will be finalized by me. So some of the biggest dons of film industry, like Gulzar Saab,
one of our great poets and also a great filmmaker of yore,
and an Academy Award winner.
He penned the lines for Jai Ho, the big song in Slumdog Millionaire.
So people like Dharma Productions and Times of India Group, they were mighty upset with me as to what is happening. Who are you to decide whom we should take as director? So my standard reply would be, then don't take the book. I'm not selling it. So they realized that there is something difficult about this man. So they signed the dotted line, all right. But I don't think they are still pleased. I went and I met recently one gentleman, at least Karan Johar, yesterday in a party. He had come to Lake Como for this engagement, and he says, "Oh, it was you."
We'll come back to how the director and the writer actually then later viewed him. Kathy, in the same way, when you first wrote the very first book, and you wrote it quietly, nobody knew about it, will you just take us through how did you actually get it published, and at that point of time, what happened?
Well, it's not a typical story, I guess. I wrote the book in secret because I was teaching full-time at university, and I don't know, I just didn't tell anybody I was writing fiction because you're supposed to be writing science in a science department, and I'd never done fiction. Well, maybe my resume, but other than my resume, I hadn't really dabbled in fiction, so I didn't know if I could do it or not. So it took me a couple of years to finish the book, and the only people that knew about it were my family. So my kids would, when they'd know Mom is working on the book, don't bother her. She's writing her first novel, and their eyes would roll, and there was a whole lot of... They don't do that so much anymore. But when I finished it, my oldest daughter was dating a fellow who had a friend who had a friend who had a friend who worked in publishing. And he said, well, why don't you send it to Mary Sue? And I thought, well, where does she work? What publisher does, maybe she works in the cafeteria or something. But turned out she was a junior editor with Scribner, which is a very good house in the U.S. And so I wrote a cover letter and just mailed it off to Mary Sue. And Mary Sue is on the other end of this, hearing that her friend's mother's first novel is coming her way. So she took a few chapters home with her that Friday, composing her reject letter, and turned around, went back into Manhattan, picked up the rest of it. I learned all of this later. Picked up the rest of it, read it, handed it up to the appropriate level, up to the publisher at Scribner, and I think I had an offer I had set my limit at 50 reject slips. You always hear about reject slips, and you can paper the walls with them. So I said, if I get 50 rejects, I'll take that as a commentary on my writing skills and go back to my day job. And as it turned out, the first house to whom I sent it bought it within, I think, 2 weeks or so.
And at that point, you didn't have an agent. So how did you construct?
Yeah, and trying to sell something without an agent is just stupid. It just doesn't work. When I sold it, they said to me, we think you would be happier with an agent. And I said, no, because I also had a lower limit of, this is the lowest amount I'm going to accept for my book, right? Never having published a novel. Well, they were offering me way, way more than that. So I said, no, I'm fine, I'm good, let's do this. They said, no, we think you should have an agent. So I didn't know any agents. So she came and visited me from New York, from a small boutique agency, and she negotiated. By the end of the day, she had quadrupled their offer and pulled back all these rights that I probably would have just signed away. So to this day, she's still my literary. But I kept saying, Jennifer, don't screw it up. Just let's take it. And she kept saying, no, I have a figure in my... Yeah, so I do recommend having...
And did she hold back the rights for television and film?
Yeah, that didn't come until, I think, about 8... My first novel was published in 97, and the show began production, I think, in 2005. So do the math. What is that, 8 years? It was something like 8 years down the road, so I'd already published 7 or 8 novels at that point.
And did you again hold on to the creative license of that, or did you let that go?
Everybody negotiates their own deal, as you heard, and he was much stricter in negotiating his than I was. But once you option your character, you really give up control unless you have it specifically written into your contract that you're going to function as, executive producer, or you're going to have oversight on every script. But that's really pretty rare in Hollywood. So the reason I'd had other offers and I never accepted them, but the reason I took this particular one with these people was that they genuinely wanted my input. So I would not say I had control, but I definitely had input on, and then I worked with the writers a lot. My one insistence was that we keep the science as close to accurate as possible.
I'll come back to the science in a second. Sabrina, you've had a different experience. Many of these people have come to you with a story in the, let's tell you the story, and then you can go out and create the screenplay. Tell us a little bit about that process, and if you use Monsoon Wedding as an example, because that would be most familiar with our audience.
Yeah. Well, Monsoon Wedding I created like fully from film school, unlike some of the other films where it was a collaboration. Well, I can talk about Monsoon Wedding. I was in film school and I was in a revision class, and you were supposed to have a full-length screenplay to be in that class. I didn't have one, and I signed up, and so I panicked about 4 days before class was to start. I had to hand in a script. And I had been thinking about writing a movie about sexual abuse in an upper middle class Indian family for many years. It's one of the reasons I went to film school. It was one of the stories I wanted to write. So I thought I would write about that. A few months ago, I had run into Meera, who directed the film, purely by accident in New York. She read something I wrote. She really liked it, said we should work together. I said, that'd be great. She said, do you have any ideas? And I said, well, I want to write about sexual abuse. She had just come off like a very serious, dramatic film, Kama Sutra, some years ago. And she said, I just need to do something light, like a wedding film. And I was like, well, I know, it's too bad, but we'll find something in the future, for sure. And then when I was panicking about writing the script, I thought, well, why not, like, see if I can put those two things together, which are hard tonally, because on one side it's light and it's kind of a romantic comedy, but then it also has sexual abuse, incestuous sexual abuse, which Indian movies, in popular culture, we didn't speak about that at the time. So I did that, and like Kathy, it was the first feature film that I had finished. It was the first film that I had finished, and Meera read the first draft, really liked it, said, let's do it. It was super low budget, which really helps with getting a film produced. You know, once the budget is high, there's so many levels of people who can say yes and no, and then it inevitably takes much longer, if it happens at all. So, yeah, I finished a draft in December, and then we were shooting by August in Delhi. The first draft was actually set, the movie was, it wasn't called Monsoon Wedding. It was just called Wedding. If that, I don't even know if it had a working title. But it was set in the winter, because usually Indian weddings are in the winter, because that's when it's nice in Delhi, the weather is nice. But Meera said she could only shoot over her son's summer break. She didn't want to leave him for so long. So I was like, ooh, well, there's a chance of getting the movie produced, so yeah, let's make it in the monsoon. And so the working title was A Monsoon Wedding, and then it just so happened, yeah.
I don't know whether you remember, I was supposed to play the television anchor.
Oh my God, yes, the creepy guy.
Yeah, the creepy guy.
Oh, terrible casting.
And Meera said, what are we going to do with your hair? And anyway, as it happened, the schedule just didn't work for me, because you all ran over schedule, and it wasn't on the date that I was supposed to shoot, and then my schedule was bad. But sticking to that, working with such a strong director like Meera, what happens to the script, and what happens to the process? I mean, once you've done the script, you hang on to it and say, this is it, and I'm not going to change it? Or does it evolve and change? And how does it come into being a happy mix?
It's rarely happy. It's strange with film. Unlike any other form of writing, you actually surrender your copyright, so you don't own anything. The moment you take any money, you lose every right in all media, in perpetuity, in the entire universe. You have nothing.
That's literally what the release says.
Yes,
you
that's
know,
right.
Forever and always, anywhere in the universe. Yeah.
Even if you were dead, you get nothing.
Interstellar,
in your
so when it's being shown in Mars, it's different.
Every birth. So you sell everything, and once you've done that, you're in a very vulnerable position, because they can ask you to make revisions that you may not want to make, and if you say no, they can just hire someone else to do it. Screenwriters are very bitter people, because this happens with them frequently. Even really successful ones are really bitter, wretched old people. And that's, even Steven Spielberg once said dealing with studio executives is like being pecked to death by ducks. Can you imagine how hard it would be to be pecked to death by ducks? So what happens is in low budget films, the writer only has control up to the first draft. After that, it's all collaboration. It's not just the director, it's stars. And some stars have great input. I mean, anybody can have great input. But sometimes star input is like, yeah, instead of a shower, can I take a bath? I've really been working out for the last 6 weeks. So it's stuff like, it is stuff like that. And everybody comes to you, and you have to kind of find a way to accommodate that, or at least make them believe you're accommodating that without losing. So I have found ways to deal with it if anybody is struggling with producers. But you do, so in a low budget film, it's collaborative because they want to work with you. I mean, after all, you wrote it, you know this world, you know these characters, and a smart director would want to work with the writer. And so you do that. On really big films, you just, you have input to some extent, but you really, the producer's, assistant person has like a really terrible idea about something. I can give you, I have horrible war stories, but that would take up the whole time. Then, then you go with it. You just find a way to make it work, and you rage, and you're unhappy, and yeah.
But
depends.
Harinder, this wasn't the case with you, because you were very determined that you would tell a particular kind of story, and rumor has it that you drove both the director and Gulzar pretty much up the wall, and they wouldn't necessarily want to be in the same room. So how did you sort of hang on to it and bullied them into doing the kind of film that you wanted?
See, it was not bullying. I lived 18 years with an angel. Those who do not believe, I have proofs that an angel exists or angels exist. My bread and butter was not writing. By God's grace, I come from a very humble background, but I'm well-to-do now. So I demanded that I'll have it only this way. It is my way or highway. And they were not appreciating because I was not a producer, or I was not a writer, I was not a known person. And in Bollywood, egos run very high. Anyways, producers' egos are sky high. But they were unable to fathom. In 2008, I denied this book to Shah Rukh Khan. And when somebody made a statement
So
to
Shah
me
Rukh
that,
Khan is like our Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt sort of rolled into one.
so when this gentleman came to me and he said that in that case, if you're not giving the book to us, we will. And furthermore, I demanded obscene kind of money, and nobody was willing to pay. So they said, no, nobody ever demands this kind of money. Then I said, don't buy it. My standard line was, don't buy it. But when Shah Rukh Khan's man director, Samar Khan, came to me and said that I will use your book and give you credit. So I went and met his father-in-law, Mr. Cheba, who was my fellow army colleague. And I said, this is what your son-in-law's manager has told me. I received an apology 2 weeks later on a letterhead. And then by the time I produced Nanak Shah Fakir, which went to Cannes Film Festival, Los Angeles, Toronto, I produced it out of nowhere at the blessings of that lady who said, don't make a film on me, make it on Guru Nanak. Tell the world there is only one Lord. Stop killing in the name of Lord. And what is the stature of a woman in our society? How this happened, how a nomad, no knowledge of filmmaking, I landed up producing a film which goes on to, it was specially called for screening at Rashtrapati Bhavan, the President House. It was screened, the film's copy went to Richard Gere from Cannes. It was amazing. Now coming to Sehmat, I was very emboldened that this book will not go to any Tom, Dick and Harry. And it will be my way. I wanted a particular director. I wanted a particular artist. The key role to be played by Alia Bhatt. Now, they were not agreeing to this initially because this is expensive proposition for them. But when you don't want to give the book otherwise, and they want it desperately, they will pay you. When they paid me that kind of money, I said, I do not want this money, give it to charity. It's then they realize that there is a purpose behind this madness. So if you are now have written 3 more books, and the word is out that the 3 books are done and done, and so 3 of the topmost directors are talking to me and trying to understand how we will go about it. And I've given them a very simple proposal that I'll co-produce with you, I'll put my money in it. So then you can demand anything. You're not going with a begging bowl. You are very sure about the reality of the book. Like a mother met, it's all courtesy, sehmat, that I'm traveling this distance.
Sehmat is the lady who
Protagonist.
who became the spy and then crossed over and then came back to India. Kathy, in the way that he said that I refused to let them, play around with my book. You were talking about one of the things that you insisted on was the scientific correctness in the telling of the story. Tell us, how did you achieve that if you didn't have the rights? And did they sort of consult with you because you were the expert? And perhaps also just touch upon the fact that as a woman, was it more difficult to establish yourself as the sort of scientific, this thing of all knowledge in this particular area?
2 different questions. Forensic sciences tend to be more male-dominated, not so much as they were in the past, but at the time, long ago when I went into the field, yes, it was much more male-dominated. How did I the reason I chose the 2 producers and the showrunner that I did is that they genuinely wanted my input. They didn't have to listen to anything, and they didn't always listen to everything I had to say. They didn't, and I can really identify with Sabrina when she talks about there are factors as the writer you may not be aware of, like budget. I remember I wrote one episode and it was our show always opened with some body being discovered in some bizarre situation. So my opening scene was a man or kid driving along on an all-terrain vehicle, and he hits something, he goes airborne, he goes crashing down into a puddle of slime, and there's a body in there, and then cue the music. That got changed to 2 kids walking in the woods past a beaver dam and noticing a body in a beaver dam. Why? Because it's cheaper. You don't have to crash an ATV, you don't have to have a stunt driver, you don't have to have a medic on scene when you're shooting it. So those are the kinds of things as a writer you don't necessarily think of. But what we did not know, and it turned out pretty well. I mean, the opening is a tight close-up of this beaver, and then we pan out to the body. What we didn't know, though, is that there are only 3 working beavers in Los Angeles, and they were all booked. So we're getting down to where it's time to shoot the scene, and we don't have a beaver. Fortunately, I don't know, one of them must have had a cancellation or a dispute or with their agent or something. So we got the beaver, and we were told it was a bolter, that as soon as the wrangler opened the cage, the beaver would bolt. Anytime you have an animal, you have to have a wrangler. So we had both wranglers for the beaver and wranglers for the slugs, because the slugs were creating the slime. That's a different story. But anyway, so we're all standing around, so this hard-gotten beaver doesn't take off, and she just sits there. She just sits there. Turned out it was a very elderly beaver. So the only reason she's giving this good performance is we're all standing around kind of bribing her with carrots and things around. But I digress. But anyway, there are a lot of factors that can figure in that they change your script. It could be budget, it could be a particular actor in a continuing series. You have the same core of actors. Including
the location. I mean, you change cities completely.
The location, it could be a particular actor's not available that week. There are all kinds of factors that as a writer you don't think of.
And just scientifically, because finally at the end of the day, every time there was an autopsy, every time, your protagonist sort of put together the story behind this particular dismemberment of this body, you still got the facts right or the science right.
Yeah, all of the methodologies are real. All of the technology that you saw, all of our sets were actual medical supply house materials. Now, what Temperance Brennan was able to do with those things was pretty impressive. One of the unrealistic things about TV is that mystery thrillers, murder mysteries also, is every single case gets solved. Every single week they find that one little clue that leads to the breakthrough and they solve it. And in reality, that's not very accurate.
Sabrina, what makes a film so successful? Like a Monsoon Wedding, or I know most people here haven't seen Ishqiya. Ishqiya was also very successful in its format. What's that magic something? Is it in the shooting? Is it the characters? I mean, Monsoon Wedding, for example, you know, it was a story that resonated across the world, across India. It was a simple story, but with a complex theme, but a theme that everybody sort of in some way empathized with as having happened either with them or in their family, etc. But what makes that? What's that magic? I mean, do you know when you're writing that this is that script that's going to be?
No, of course not. No, you have no idea. You have no idea. I don't know. I mean, I wish I did. What I found is that unlike most writing mediums, film is probably in some ways the most deeply collaborative of all of them, because you could even, you could conceivably put up a play, without too many people. But even if you look at a short film, there's at least 50 people in the credits. It takes a lot of people to make a film, and it's hundreds on a feature. And in some ways, a film is only as strong as its weakest element. So I don't know what makes it work, but I know any one department being weak can destroy a film. For example, this is an example I love. Polanski had made Chinatown, and he had a screening for it. And he called everyone, and it's exactly the same film that you'd see today. And the screening went terribly. Everybody hated the film, and he didn't know what he'd done wrong. And then he was talking to a friend, and he realized that he needed to change the background score. It's exactly the same film, but it's different background music, and it made it into this seminal classic, American film. So even background score, which is when you write, you realize is as important as dialogue. It can completely ruin or enhance your experience of watching a film. So it's so delicate that every time a film works, it's kind of like a mini miracle, because so many elements have to come together in exactly the right way to
But
make
your
it work.
process in Ishqiya and your process in Monsoon Wedding was different.
Yes, and then of course I also did Monsoon Wedding as a stage play, as a musical.
We'll come to that in a second.
So no, it's different, and it's been different in some ways with whatever I've done. So Ishqiya and Kamine, which are two big Bollywood films that I've written, I co-wrote them. So they had a draft, it wasn't working, they brought it to me. I looked at it, and I said, this is how I do it, and then you get into it, and of course it's always much more complicated. And I worked on that. Monsoon Wedding, it was very autobiographical. In the first draft that I wrote, I so wanted to write about my life in Delhi growing up. I hadn't even changed anyone's names, and then suddenly it was being produced, and I was like, oh fuck, I need to change people's names, or they'll. But the thing that I found, which was amazing, if you're ever worried about writing a character who is someone you know and you're worried that they'd find out or somebody else would be and they'd be mad at you, no one ever thinks they're the villain. They all think they're the good guy, so you can just right away.
Harinder, when you were writing the book, when you started the process of writing the book, which is really quite a brilliant book, did you have a film in mind, or was that something that happened later?
See, I would send her one chapter at a time.
When you said send her, the
Samat.
director or Samat?
To Samat.
Samat is the lady again.
The
going
lady
back.
again. I had no idea that I'll be making a film.
So she was alive when you went
Till April 2018. And she would chop off few things here and there. She would think that I'm exaggerating. And when you will read the book, you'll realize she did not chop off one of the most difficult murders that she's supposed to have done, and in my opinion, she could not have. Mercury killing. It's very expertise. It's you're not asking somebody, show me your hand, I want to puncture it and drop a mercury inside. It doesn't happen like that. Now that
She stumbles on the staircase as she's coming down to this person who she thinks is going to has the information that will reveal the fact that she's the spy and will result in all of this other chaos. So she coming down the steps, she stumbles and injects him with mercury from her umbrella tip.
Now, according to me, she couldn't have done it. I've spent time in the Navy, in the military. We know how difficult such processes are, how talented one has to work into it. But she didn't score it off. Now, one chapter at a time, like there's a dance sequence where a Muslim girl dances as Meera, a Hindu deity, and she was stopped. And how that sequence actually took place, I went to London to meet a lady called Mitali, which is an original name, just for 10 minutes. I wanted her version. And she was initially not keen to give me her version. But that is how you, step by step, you began building. And the book was written in 2008. It was published all across. It doesn't happen that Penguin picks it up 10 years later. Penguins is not known to pick up a second-hand book. And 50,000 copies sold in no time. So my journey since my introduction to Sahmat is filled with many such stories.
No, but so did you have the film in mind? I mean, was that no? That came later.
That came much later. That idea propped up when Shah Rukh Khan's team came to Delhi and said they said that they will like to make a movie. Also, Kiran Kher said that this book should become a film. One more, I dare say. I had a meeting with Meera Nair in Delhi. I wanted her to direct Guru Nanak's film, and she said she would like to do Calling Sahmat. So I realized that this book has far more potential than, I'm not a writer. Unlike Sabrina, I'm nobody. But when people see interest and show interest, and when you demand some obscene kind of money, not in lakhs, and then they succumb and they say, okay, get lost, here is the money. On top of it, you put restrictions. My choice of director, my choice of leading lady. They don't like it. And even if then they are buying it, it's a miracle taking place.
Kathy, Bones, it was really a first mover. Of course, there were all of these serials on hospitals which had become very successful. There was on law companies, etc. But this was, in a sense, really the very first that looked at the science of behind this sort of.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact timing, but CSI went on maybe a year or so before we did. Yeah, so.
No, but your book had been written way before.
Yes, yes, but there was this explosion of interest in forensics beginning somewhere in the 90s, and yeah. So.
But in your first writing of the book, how, what, why? I mean, why this particular subject?
Because it's what I do. I'm a forensic anthropologist. I have a doctorate in that, and I'd been practicing in forensic labs, for some time at that point. And I'd made full professor, so I was free to try something different. And I thought fiction would be a way to share my science with a much broader audience than just another scientific textbook or something. So, and I had just worked on an interesting serial murder case. So I had an idea and I had the freedom.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the.
Oh my goodness! Child. It was a serial murderer in Montreal he killed 2 women, and he was caught after the second one, and he admitted to having killed a third woman 2 years earlier, cut her up and buried her in 5 locations. So I helped with the recovery of that body, and then I helped with analyzing the marks in the bones resulting from the dismemberment. It wasn't a question of ID, which my cases often are, because we knew who the victim was supposed to be, so that was dental. but it had to do with the manner of the dismemberment. So I thought, well, that's unique, that's different. That might be what I write are good old-fashioned murder mysteries, but the solution is driven with science. So I thought that would be. And then in each of my books, I try to use a different, it's not bones and bones and bones. I try to use a different kind of forensic science in each of the books.
And when you go into your lab and you've been and you continue to consult, do you then start thinking about the background of this person and how? What's your process?
Well, when you're working on, I'm one of a team. There are people we're a complete cross-sectional forensic and medical legal lab. So there's DNA and there's ballistics and there's fire and arson and the bomb guys and the criminalists and everybody's there. So I happen to work on the victim, him or herself. So you try to stay objective and not think about, in Tempe you get a lot of this thought process as she's working on cases. You try to stay objective and just do your job and not become emotionally involved. Otherwise you can't do an adequate, proper analysis. Later, that's different. Later you...
Sabrina, how do your characters come to life? Is it as you're writing, do they have their own stories, or are you in control? Are they in control? Is it a negotiation between the character on the page? What happens?
I think to some extent, almost every character I write, I don't know if that's true for like other people who write dramatic works, is in some way like a reflection of you or someone really close to you, even if they're nothing like that person in terms of age or what they do. There's some essence that you relate to, or that you have known. Sometimes the best kind of writing, sometimes it's labored, which is no fun at all when you have no idea how this person will respond or what they'll do, and then usually that's a sign that something isn't quite working. But at some point, it doesn't always happen to me like in the very beginning. It happens at some point in the screenplay, and it's euphoric, because mostly writing is such misery that's nice when there's some moments of euphoria, when you just know exactly what the character will do or what they'll say, and even if it's surprising to you. And they kind of just, like the tent contractor in Monsoon Wedding. Eventually, I just had so much fun writing him because it was effortless.
But was he eating flowers even in your script?
Yes,
or was
yes.
that
So people think...
that's what he does. He sort of puts
Marigolds.
a marigold into his mouth in his moment of tension and keeps eating, which became this fabulous.
So I think sometimes people think that screenwriting is a lot of dialogue writing, and that is not true at all. In fact, dialogue is probably the least important element when you're writing. Setting up character, plotting, the action, what people do, because what people do reveals much more about who they are than what they say. And figuring out how to build and raise the stakes, and it's a very limited form in terms of like, you have to set up, you have to have resolution. TV is different, but in film you do. TV you need a resolution too, but you also are going to go on the next week. I've totally forgotten what you asked me.
Does the character come to life
Yes.
as you're writing?
Yes.
Does it
So
dominate
often-
you? Do you dominate the character?
Yes, so you have like all these crazy people running through your head all the time. And you do feel kind of insane because there are people, and it's such a cliche, but it is so completely true. I don't know if anybody else on the panel experiences that, but every time I'm struggling with something and I just decide I can't do it anymore and I stop and I do something else, like a solution will come. It's like when you stop working almost that you find ways to fix something. And then they come to you. And since I grew up with a very, very, very large family. I have 44 first cousins, and we were really close. And I was close with my uncles and aunts, and that, I think, has been the gold mine of my life, because there's always someone to lean on. There's always someone to talk about. There's always someone to base someone on. And I don't know what I would have done without that. I probably wouldn't have been a writer. I would have been a doctor, like 43 of them.
And were you involved in the casting? I mean, for example, my mother-in-law who played the aunt, my mother-in-law is this poet and extremely, an aesthete, and it really speaks so softly. And I used to say, Mom, can you speak up? We can't hear what you're saying. And then she plays roughly that same kind of character in Monsoon Wedding. Were you involved in the casting process?
A
Because,
little
of course,
bit, because
Dilip
it was
was.
so low budget. A lot of my cousins are like extras. I am too. Um, a lot of like clothes came from home. It was really kind of homemade style. Um, I sat in on some of the casting stuff. I mean, the writer has no authority over casting. You have more in theater. And in fact, in theater, you're expected to be sitting in on auditions, but not on film. I happened to be on set, but that was because, we were collaborating well, and, and so I was. Otherwise, the director doesn't want you on set, and for good reason, because things will change. They will change for budget, they will change because we're losing light, they will change for any number of reasons. They will have to change your script, or an actor will say a line which is nothing like you intended it to be delivered, and you will sit there stewing and raging that they're destroying your work and make everyone's life miserable, and you're not really supposed to do that, because you're supposed to let the director take over, because once it's in production, it's out of your hands. But it's really hard. It's like watching your child date someone you despise. It's like you're dying to say something, but you know nothing good will come of it.
The off time that I've stopped, we have to stop. The off time that I've directed, one of my things has always been that writer will not come to the floor. I do not want the writer anywhere near me, and I must have every access to change the script. But a quick question before we open it to the house for a couple of questions. Harinder, both your characters in these two films, Nanak as well as Sehmat, were biographical characters. I mean, they were real, and that's how you. In these new books that you've written, is that the same that you've done? Is it based on biography?
So first of all, I don't agree that a writer cannot control. I'm not a writer, and I am demanding it, and it's happening. So once was a fluke, twice, and three more, 5. I don't think if a writer is capable of putting everything aside and even co-produce it, it will happen the way you want it. As regards to the other 3 books, all 3 are based on true stories. So it's become a passion that if I'm not working, which more often than not I am not. I'm now 60 plus, and I've risen in company, and they think that let him do what he wants to do. So I go on researching here, and calling Sehmat book has given me connections to intelligentsia, the retired intelligentsia. So I get inputs, I get phenomenal data. Unlike US, where a data becomes a restricted data comes into public domain, in India it doesn't. So what happened in Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar's time will remain in secret data. So something has to be leaked out. Some bridges have to be built over small pillars, and then you build on that, and then you try and find out. So these 3 stories that I'm doing are all based on facts.
Thank you. Opening it up to the audience, and I'm assuming there's a story cooking with the big wedding that you've been to, and there'll be a story from there. Maybe you and Sabrina can finally actually collaborate.
So, sure. So, Harvinder Ramjani, I have a question for you. The new true stories which are coming along, you are 100% sure those will be the blockbuster stories, right?
You see, I have a faith in myself. I have faith in the lady who has helped me do these books and stories. The one story that I'm doing is how, trying to bring it to the knowledge of in public domain, how in Navy, that's on a book called Gobind. Again, all 3 books have been taken away by Penguin at the drop of hat. So there must be something potential in it. One of them has been taken up by Vishal Bhardwaj in one sitting. The second one I'm discussing with another 2. There are 2 top directors, and I'm trying to think I am trying to think. And they're laughing at me. The world is perhaps laughing at me, what this guy is made of. So if you are determined in mind.
It comes with corporate heft, ladies and gentlemen, apart from everything else.
There has to be some secret stores when Pixar films make that every film is a blockbuster, one after another. I want to see what is his secret sauce,
Anybody else?
Yes. My name is Kathy Lane. I work here at the library with kids, and we're encouraging them to explore careers in science. And my question is for Kathy Reichs. I admire how Tempe Brennan's sense of the bones is depicted on the show, and I'm curious how your sense of the bones is versus your career with science and the learning that you have, And is the skill that you have as a forensic anthropologist, the learning that you have, and how much of that is passion in the sense of the bones?
Well, I think it is partly. You have to have a certain psychological makeup to go into my field. We used to sometimes call Emily Deschanel, who played Tempe on TV, the bone whisperer, because she would have these sessions where she could almost feel what the bones were telling her. And there's a little bit of that. But it comes from having trained for years and years and years what to look for. So in my case, it's more the scientist that comes out rather than the bone whisperer, I suppose you could say.
Yes, right here.
Thank you. Well, I have actually 100 questions, but I'll ask only one. The question to Harinder. These two, Nanak and the Hindi film Razi or Calling Sehmat,
Sehmat.
they are very different. And when I see them, I still feel you are making a statement there. Because you are obviously not, you didn't make movies for money, because if that was the thing, then you would choose any topic which will sell. So it's not for money. So you are making a statement, it seems. And I got the impression you are making a statement that what is most important is your inner conviction. Is that right, or some other secret? Thank you.
You see, what I learned from Sehmat is that when you die, 70% of the money remains in bank for kids to go to courts. So me and my wife, who's sitting here, we've decided that we'll make our life simpler and make sure that before we hang our boots, our bank balance is zero. Now, when you want nothing in life, you are the richest. It's only when you are expecting, the society today teaches you barter. You tell your child, bring so-and-so marks and A grade, and then we'll give you bicycle or a cell phone and what have you. Whereas actually, the society is supposed to do differently. A very great saint, Tulsi Das ji, who wrote Ramayana, he said that koi nirp ho, hame kya hani. Means if you're rich, how does it matter to me? We have reversed that. If you're rich, that's the reason for my unhappiness. If you're happy, that's the reason for my unhappiness. Through these books and these real life stories, what I'm trying to bring out is that when you are simple in heart and mind and soul, you're happy at all times without a reason. You don't need a reason to be happy. But to find happiness on a war front, that was a challenge. To find a happiness from a lady who was in deep depression, that was a challenge. Now, whether this product was Nanak or Calling Sehmat or Gobind and the Navy or another two stories which are coming out, one is a sequel of Calling Sehmat, how she would make me do things, drop me hint here and there, and how I would get away with blue murders, literally. So it's this art of doing nothing with your conviction. It has happened to me accidentally or planned by somebody else. But the journey that I'm today traveling is somebody will spend $1 billion and maybe not get it.
Yes, this lady here.
Hi, I love this talk, so interesting. My name is Anna, and whoever wants to answer can answer. I actually asked Kathy at her talk yesterday, so feel free to chime in, Kathy, or Harinder, or
Sabrina,
sorry. Anyway, I want to know what is the best way to... I have a story that I want to tell, and it's about emotional abuse that is so widespread, but so misunderstood. And so I want to have control over this story. And I'm just wondering, and I want to reach the maximum number of people. So I'm just wondering, what's the best way to do it? And I don't care how long it takes, and I don't care about the money. I just want to get it out there. So would you suggest writing a book, and then if it goes to film, great? Or, because after hearing Sabrina talk about writing a screenplay, I'm not sure I want to do that.
So let's just hold the answer on that and take one more question, and then we'll get everybody to answer it together.
Thanks, everybody. That was very interesting. I actually have a question for Sabrina. You mentioned going into your film class and you needed a screenplay as a prerequisite for the class, is that right? Or the first assignment or whatever. And so was Monsoon Wedding, did that come from that assignment exactly?
I had to do the assignment. Should I just start with question 2 or should we go to question 1?
Either which way. I mean, if you can answer both, and then I'll go to Kathy and go to Harinder.
Okay. So just to yours, I did have to have a completed screenplay, so it had to at least hit about 80, 85 pages to be respectable. But it was a story I'd been thinking about. I just never put it down on paper. I had written maybe 10 pages here and there, like the opening. So then I wrote it over basically 4 nights, and I just stayed up day and night, more or less, just venting, vomiting it out. So, and then that became Monsoon Wedding, yeah. And, I mean, of course, I revised it since because you have to and you do, but it was pretty much the same stories, and the same characters as the final. It was a pass-fail class. I passed.
Do you want to answer the first question?
Yes. Yes, write it as a book. Write it as a book, which in some ways you may find a wider audience with film. Film is way more accessible than books are. People just watch movies more than they write books. But if you write a book and the book, and the book, and people respond to the book and they feel engaged with the book, you will have the opportunity to get it also made into a movie, and that'll be easier. Like selling a script itself, I mean, forget about what you lose once you, in the script to screen process in terms of your rights, but just finding someone to make your movie is so hard. So, because with the book there are options and you can find a way to self-publish or publish a short story and then get some money to, or not, but do it. Also, I think sometimes it depends on the material. If you're writing a story that is deeply internal, a book is a much better way to write it because films depend fully on externalization and dramatization. So that's what.
Well, I don't want to repeat myself from what I said yesterday. I just went through the process of pitching, and that's what you do in Hollywood for a TV series. This might be kind of fun for y'all. Here's how it works. First you write a pitch document, and that's an outline of your whole story that you want them to make into a TV series. So you do your pitch document. Then you get yourself invited with an agent or, whatever your team is at that point. I just finished doing this with a former showrunner from Bones. So we pitched to all 4 broadcast networks. And normally they'll say to you, we'll get back to you. Or they might say, no, thank you, that doesn't really fit in with what we're doing. Or they might do what's called buying it in the room, and they buy it right there. If you do manage to sell it to one of the networks, then you will be asked to do first a 2-page synopsis, kind of your elevator pitch. It's really tight, where you want to go with that. Then you'll be asked to do a script. If they've actually bought it, then they will pay you to write the script. If they like the script, they will then order it to pilot. And if they like the pilot, they will then order it picked up. Usually for broadcast networks, not cable, they'll pick it up for 12. And then if that goes well, they'll pick it up for a full 22 episode season. So it is a long process with a very, very low probability outcome of actual success. As I said, I went through this with one of our showrunners, and I'm only mentioning this not to blow my own horn, but we sold it to 3 networks. We're going with ABC, and the pilot, we are setting the series in Boulder, Colorado. So that may get changed, of course, but that's what we're doing.
So again, I have a different version in this. I went to meet Sanjoy in Delhi. He introduced me to a boy, Vicky Roy. At the age of 8, he ran away from home, became a rag picker. And then he started doing odd jobs here and there. And then he became an assistant photographer. He went on climbing the ladder. He brought his own catalog on coffee table book. He was picked up by MIT, became fellow, and then he was invited by the Prince Andrews for lunch or dinner, whatever. He was picked up by National Geographic. He stood top 4. I'm making a 10-minute film on him and writing a short story on him, and 50 similar stories which you should think about, real life stories. And we're telling and we're selling this on free of cost on television. Look at this brilliant idea that came from somewhere. And we're telling the people, the poorest of the poor, that if your child has talent, we will support. Now, when that goes, who's joined hands with me? The Prime Minister of India. So we're telling government, it is your job to promote those who cannot afford. We will take 10% of the budget. We will spend 10%. Your job is first to give back to society, which has been so generous to you that you're sitting today in such august audience. Your job is to actually revert back to people. And such boys, Vicky Roy, who's brought out by Salam Bombay, again on which Sanjoy and Meera are directors. Such people lend such imaginative motivation to the lowest of the lowest rungs. Our blood color is same. Yours and mine is not different, it is red. We need to give back to society as humanity and not as caste and creed. You should write small stories like this. There'll be plenty. And that will motivate you, because you are trying to jump from 50th floor to the swimming pool. It'll not happen. You jump from 5-inch board and then go. I used to write 1 chapter at a time, and the book became a national success. So small little steps, baby steps, your heart will make you a writer. That's my take.
On that very happy note, thank you all so much. Thank you, Harinder, Sabrina, Kathy. Absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you all for staying back for so late, and I hope you're going to join us at the concert at the Canyon Theatre immediately
Beginning
after.
now.
Beginning now.